Hello everyone, this is Katizi here back with another build guide, and today I'm going to share my Toxic Rain Occultist. So I league started with this the last two leagues in SSF, and I can say that it is a great league starter. The clear is very good and the single target damage is also decent. It has been slightly nerfed in 3.14, but it is still definitely viable. Some of the pros include very good clear with profane bloom explosions, meaning that there's no need to run Caustic Arrow. Second, you have pretty decent mapping defense with Blasphemy, Temp Chains, and Malediction, which causes cursed enemies to deal 10% less damage. Third, you have pretty decent single target due to lots of damage scaling on your Ascendancy. And finally, you have pretty good mana sustain due to the Witch starting position on the tree, and also the fact that the Occultist Ascendancy basically has higher damage in exchange for lower attack speed relative to other Ascendancies. Some cons include that your Ascendancy doesn't give you any sort of movement speed, so it is a bit of a slower build for clearing. And second, it is also kind of squishy in a very late endgame scenario. For example, if you're doing content like 80% Delirious T16s, or 4-way Breach Lords, or anything more difficult than that, it can be kind of a 50-50 whether or not you'll able to complete that content. So, as many of us know, Toxic Rain was nerfed quite heavily in the recent 3.14 patch, and many people, including myself, wondered whether or not it would still be viable to play, and my answer is yes. However, the total damage output on single target appears to be around 30% lower than what it was previously, and let me explain why. So the biggest nerf was that the area of effect modifier no longer scales Toxic Rain's damage. Previously, you could stack a bunch of pods on top of each other with area of effect, and you could usually achieve 4, sometimes 5 pods overlapping every time you shoot a volley. However, now you don't get it anymore, and basically now you're pretty much stuck at around 3 overlaps per volley, no matter what your area of effect modifier is. So going down from 4.5 overlaps to 3 overlaps per volley means that you get roughly 33% less damage. However, to compensate for that, they reduced the base range spread of the spore pods. So it's more like a total of 25% total damage loss in my experience from that. There have also been a couple of numerical nerfs, which you can see here. Finally, with the Harvest rework, you are actually no longer able to deterministically craft a +2 amulet for Toxic Rain. And there are 2 reasons why this is so. The first reason is that you are no longer able to augment onto influence items. So some people had the idea that if you had a Hunter amulet with +1 dex gems, in theory, you could do multi-mod, prefixes cannot be changed, suffixes cannot be changed, and then use a Harvest Reforged Chaos, and in theory, it would give you +1 Chaos gems. However, they shadow nerfed this method of doing it, and the mod Chaos Damage Leech's Life previously did not have the Chaos tag, but in 3.14 it does have the tag now. So Reforging Chaos will most of the time give you Chaos Damage Leech's Life. So you can no longer create a +2 amulet deterministically, is basically what happened. So I would say that that overall nerfs Toxic Rain's damage in the late game by like 5 to 10%. However, in 3.14 there have been 2 new bases that were released, and these are the Apothecary's Gloves and the Iolite Ring. And these items, they drop from certain regions in the Atlas. These are Atlas bases, and they feature flat damage implicits that benefit Toxic Rain. So it's not all nerfs. So in 3.14, the way to scale Toxic Rain is you want to look for projectile damage, area damage, damage over time multiplier, chaos damage over time multiplier, attack speed, and gem level. You are no longer looking for increased area of effect, although getting things like increasing number of arrows fired and % increased area of effect, it still helps clear a little bit, but it will not increase single target damage anymore. Also, another thing I want to touch upon is skill effect duration. So I see a lot of people building skill effect duration because in theory it makes your POB DPS go up, but in my opinion, skill effect duration is a noob trap. Skill effect duration does not increase your DPS at all unless the enemy literally stands still for you to shoot 7 volleys, and only on the 7th volley does skill effect duration make a difference because you're able to shoot 6 volleys before the first one expires. So in mapping or against bosses that move around a lot, the boss will never stand still for you to shoot 6 volleys in the air with this build. So skill effect duration gives you 0% damage increase in 99% of situations. Don't do it. Instead, try to get flat damage instead of skill effect duration. So with regard to skill gems, most of it is going to be the same as every other Toxic Rain build, so I don't want to spend too much time here, but the Toxic Rain layout that I found to be the most effective is this here. I have here Toxic Rain, Mirage Archer, Vicious Projectiles, Void Manipulation, Damage on Full Life, and Swift Affliction. If you have a 5-link, you can drop Swift Affliction, and if you have a 4-link, you can drop Damage on Full Life. And in the end game, once you get Empower 3 or 4, if you wanted to, you could swap out Damage on Full Life for Empower. And of course, if you have things like Life on Kill, for example, Cinder Swallow Flask, or Brush with Death Cluster Notable, or a Warlord chest piece with % life on kill, that makes Damage on Full Life even better. And what I like to do is I try to level 6 Toxic Rains in my offhand as soon as possible, and then as soon as they hit 20, I instantly val all of them to try to get 21. So basically I val it to try to get 21 before I flip it to put quality, because quality on Toxic Rain only increases area of effect, which again no longer increases your single target damage. So that's what I like to do. For our debuffs, we're going to be using a Wither Totem. Pretty simple stuff. It's just Wither faster casting, Spell Totem, Multiple Totem. Put the Wither on the enemy to make them take more damage. And then for the auras, this is the part where it's a little bit different to other builds. So because we're Occultist, Profane Bloom only works on cursed enemies, and Toxic Rain's application of on-hit effects is actually very bad. For some reason, the actual area where the arrows are actually hitting the enemy is like a very weird and inconsistent hitbox, so you don't actually apply on-hit curses effectively just by shooting Toxic Rain. So you need to run a Blasphemy aura of some type in this build. It's mandatory. So here we have Malevolence, of course, for damage, and then we have Temporal Chains Blasphemy, which is what I found to be the most effective. Early on, if you don't have Despair on hit from a ring or a glove, I would recommend running Blasphemy Despair, but assuming that you have Despair on hit, you can run Temporal Chains Blasphemy. And this is good because Temporal Chains aura at level 20 is actually crazy. Like when you're mapping and you are running pretty fast and you have level 20 Temporal Chains, pretty much nothing in melee range is going to hit you. I would say that it provides more damage than it provides more damage mitigation than even Flesh and Stone. So it's really helpful for mapping. And then with the remaining aura reservation, I like to run a Clarity. I find that running a Clarity of variable level between 1 and 16 usually should provide you with enough mana regen to sustain mana in conjunction with things like Elarion rings and maybe a couple of nodes in the tree if you really need it. And then, of course, if you have Enlighten, you can put it in this link as well. Finally, the one that I want to touch upon is Skitterbots. I think that Skitterbots is good against bosses, but not in mapping. So what I like to do is I just use Malevolence, Temporal Chains, Blasphemy, Clarity in mapping. And if I'm fighting like a serious boss like Cortex or Cirrus, what I like to do is I swap out my Blasphemy for Skitterbots. And then I just use that. So it's Malevolence, Skitterbots, Clarity. And then when I'm done with the boss, I take off the Skitterbots. And then for movement, I like to just do Dash and Second Wind. I also like putting Phase Run on my left mouse button. I find that it makes you move a lot faster, which helps a lot, especially since this build does naturally have lower movement speed. So I like to put that on left mouse button and just auto cast it. And then if you also have an Enhance level 3 or 4, you can link it to this setup as well for a little bit more movement speed, specifically on phase run. For the utility slash buffs, I like to run a Val Grace and Val Haste. I find these gems to be really useful. Just whenever you're in a sticky situation or whenever you're about to fight a boss, like a map boss, just pop the Val Grace and Val Haste. Gives you ridiculous 34% extra dodge, attack, and spell. And then Val Haste, 31% attack speed, 13% movement speed. Super good, just for damage in a pinch. And then finally here we have the CWDT setup. I would say that CWDT Immortal Call levels 1 and 3 is like mandatory. It really does prevent you from taking a significant amount of burst damage. And then optionally you can add in a steel skin to level 10 or increase duration at variable level just to make everything a little bit better. But I would say that of these gems, the only ones that provide like a super meaningful bonus is CWDT Immortal Call. So this is going to be the skill tree for this build. You will notice that most of it is very similar to any other Toxic Rain build, but there is a little bit of difference, and the main difference is that you start out here around the witch area. And there are a couple of unique things that you get here. First of all, the starting node gives you 25% mana regeneration rate, and also you have a lot of intelligence. And then you also have this node here, mana and life, which grants 8, 12, and 8% maximum mana. So you do naturally have a lot better mana sustain compared to other classes. And then you also have this blast radius here, which these 3 nodes total give you 20% increased area of effect and 30% area damage. You also have these 2 nodes here, Arcane Will, which grants you maximum mana and mana regeneration if you really do need to take it, so you could take this as well. Other than that, we are just going to path over here and then just get these nodes. All of this is just very standard stuff. The only notable one here is No Witnesses. I would say that No Witnesses is literally mandatory for this build. It gives you dodge and movement speed, which are both things that this build sorely needs. So I would say that you should definitely keep No Witnesses. Everything else is just pretty standard. And then moving down here, of course, we get Face Acro and then Wind Dancer as the 2 big notables. And then we just finish up here. And for the anointment, we are going to be taking Corruption as per standard. It gives you increased damage and increased effective withered, which is just pretty good for damage as well. And another thing that I should mention is if you're leveling this build, you might be interested to path over here like this and take this life and this mana, since this is like very close to where you're starting out. And Deep Thoughts gives you a lot of increased mana regeneration and maximum mana, so this could be pretty good to start off if you want to go here. And then of course you also have these pretty good life nodes, so this is also a viable option for early game. But the most important thing to talk about is the Ascendancy. So why Occultist? Well, as it turns out, Occultist is actually extremely good for Toxic Rain. There's actually a lot of synergies. So first of all, you have these big nodes here. You got Void Beacon, giving nearby enemies a whopping 20% minus to chaos resistance, which is crazy. And it's important to note that this 20% is not a curse. So you know how like most bosses like Shaper, they have like 66% reduced curse effectiveness. So this minus 20 is not a curse. So it has full effect on every enemy in the game. It's really good. It also cuts enemies' life regeneration rate as like a small side bonus. And then you have this node here, Withering Presence. This is also a totally crazy node. 15% more chaos damage and also 60% to chaos resistance. In addition, every second, you inflict a withered debuff on enemies that lasts for 15 seconds. By default, the normal wither that you get from casting like Spell Totem Wither, it only lasts for 2 seconds. So this wither lasts a very long time. And to anyone who doesn't know, well, it says here, Withered applies 6% damage taken, and you can stack it up to 15 times. And you also get a little added bonus here. Any enemy that you wither will deal 15% reduced damage over time. Then moving on here, we have the most important node, which is Profane Bloom. First of all, it makes your hexes apply to hex-proof enemies, and it also gives enemies that you curse a 40% chance to explode on death, dealing a quarter of their life as chaos damage, which is crazy. You get so many very nice explosions, and very often, like in a harvest, you'll just like kill one monster and then the entire thing will explode. Or like, I've even like one-shotted red beasts straight up in Delirium because they spawn reinforcements and then you just explode everything at once. And it actually does increase your damage and mapping by quite a bit because, for example, if you run into like a pack and there's like a yellow dude and like a bunch of white dudes, like if you ordinarily, like without Occultist, you attacked that pack, the white mobs would die first, but the yellow mob would die very slowly. But with Profane Bloom, the white mobs will die instantly, and then they will explode, and they will like remove 50% of the health off the yellow instantly. So it increases your mapping speed by quite a bit. And it's also chaos damage, right? This is a chaos damage explode. It's not physical explode. So that chaos damage explode, it can actually be scaled to a pretty ridiculous amount because this build does scale chaos damage. So it's really good. And then finally, you have this node here, Malediction. It gives you an additional curse, meaning that you can run a setup like Despair on hit in conjunction with Temporal Chain's Blasphemy, which is really good. It increases your cursed effect by 15%, which is alright, but most importantly, it applies Malediction to any enemies that you curse. And Malediction causes enemies to take 10% increased damage and deal 10% reduced damage. So it is pretty good scaling both defensively and offensively. Finally, you have a couple of little nodes here. Little nodes here are not too important. It's just 10% chaos damage, 10% chaos damage, increased curse effectiveness, and more increased curse effectiveness. But overall, Occultist is a very, very well-rounded ascendancy for Toxic Rain, both defensively and offensively. Finally, for the bandits, we are going to obviously kill all the bandits to get 2 additional passive points. Okay, so with regard to the gear, again, most of it's going to be pretty much the same to any other tier build, so don't want to spend too much time here, but at the most basic level, you can make a 5-link bow like this. You basically take a thicket bow, eye level 64 or above. You alt spam for +2 bow gems, augment regal, and then benchcraft attack speed. And on a 5-link like that, you can pretty much do all the content in the game. It's pretty good. And eventually, you will probably want to upgrade to a 6-link, and to do this, you either want to get a thicket bow, ideally eye level 86, so it can roll +2 additional arrows fired, potentially. And then you can either 6-link it manually, or you can chase after the Imperial Legacy div card. Although an important note with that, Imperial Legacy no longer drops from desert or dunes. They shadow nerfed it without telling anyone, which is kind of weird, but yeah. So now you pretty much just have to farm Desert Spring if you want to go that route. But yeah. Another thing you can do if you're SSF is you can use fossils. So if you have corroded, metallic, or jagged, it's like a 1 in 10 or 1 in 15 to get a +3 bow. It's really good. And then if you have a 4-socket resonator, you can also throw in a serrated fossil for the chance to get attack speed or additional arrows fired. That's pretty good. And then of course, if you also run into any of these uniques, you can also use them as well, and they should be pretty decent. Moving on to the chest armor. So generally speaking in SSF, you're probably going to end up with just an average rare with life and res, although there is one exception that I think is important to mention. If you can get a Warlord influence chest piece of some type, you can actually roll % life on kill. And this is really good because it allows you to use damage on full life. Or, I mean, you can use damage on full life without it, but having life on kill means that damage on full life will have extremely good uptime in maps. And as a build that doesn't naturally have any health regen or leech, I feel like life on kill has a really big impact if you can get it. And then of course you also got your uniques, Cherubs, Kintsugi, Carcass, which are also very good to use. Although an interesting note to mention about Carcass is after the 3.14 Toxic Rain nerf, the area of effect from Carcass no longer influences its damage. So you actually get more damage using Cherubs now because it has a higher range for increased damage. But Carcass should still be better overall because you get area of effect for clearing and you also get res. Moving on to helmets, again, most likely in SSF you're just going to have life and res. Just roll with that for a long time. And if you finally do get a Hunter influence at level 85, you can use Harvest or Aberrant Fossils to reforge Chaos to get nearby enemies have -9 to Chaos res. Other than that, if you get lucky, you can get a Starkonjas or a Devotos, which is also pretty sweet. Moving on to the quiver, so there is a new quiver base introduced in Ultimatum. It is the Artillery Quiver. It gives totem placement speed, which is not directly impactful for damage, but given that we do use a Wither Totem, this quiver is the best base for Toxic Rain. The only exception is if you have a Cinder Swallow. If you have a Cinder Swallow, you want a Fire Arrow Quiver so you can get fire damage to ignite and then trigger Cinder Swallow's 10% increased damage taken property. But other than that, the main properties you're looking for is just damage over time and attack speed on the quiver. And then if you can get a Hunter influence one, it can additionally roll Chaos damage over time multiplier and also movement speed if you're fortunate enough. So there's that. Then moving on to the rings. So here is where there is like a pretty big difference between this league and last league in my opinion. So first of all, you get a new ring. You get the Iolate ring. This is a new Ultimatum Atlas base, which it has a chaos damage implicit, so it's pretty useful. What I like to do with this is I like to put like Veiled Chaos Orbs on this. As you can see, this Agony Whirl Iolate ring here. Basically, the process to make this is you take an Iolate ring, you bless the implicit, and then you put the new physical and chaos damage catalyst to increase the implicit. And then I used a Veiled Chaos Orb, and I was able to unveil Frenzy Charge on kill and minimum Frenzy Charges. So I basically had a very good ring with a really good implicit, +1 minimum Frenzy Charges, which is great for Toxic Rain, and also Frenzy Charge on kill. So that's like one thing you can do. Other rings that are good is of course the Vermilion ring with the % life implicit. Can use Fertiles for 8%. And then here, for this ring here, the Vermilion ring, I basically just used essences. I basically used the Essence of Envy, which you can farm a lot of these in Haywork Hamlet, and you just spam it over and over again until you get chaos damage and then something else good. And then finally, the other ring archetype that is pretty useful is just Hunter, of course, for Despair on hit. Getting Despair on hit on a ring is really important for this build because it allows you to use Temporal Chain's Blasphemy, and that's like probably the biggest defensive layer in this build. So I would really recommend getting a Despair on hit ring ASAP. You can either get a Hunter influence ring and then use Harvest Reforged Caster to get a ring like this, or you could do Delve and go look into Chaos nodes, and eventually you're going to get some 20% Despair on hit rings, which are also pretty cool. And then of course on jewelry, if you can get the Elrion minus skill cost craft, that's also going to be a huge help for mana sustain. And then moving on to the amulet, mostly just the same stuff. Harvest Reforged Chaos or Aberrant Fossils to try to get +1 Chaos Gems or Chaos Dom multi. I would recommend using a strength base if possible, because this build naturally suffers a bit in terms of strength. And if you have high strength, it allows you to level up your damage on full life higher and also allows you to use Empower. So I would recommend using a strength base if you can. And yeah, that's pretty much it. Finally, moving on to the belt. So the belt is a pretty flexible slot. You pretty much have two choices. You can use a leather or a Stygian. If you use a Stygian, the jewel that you're gonna want is just anything that's like damage on kill or You know, maybe onslaught and kill if you want that. Basically just anything that's good. Damage over time with two-handed weapon, etc. Or you can just use a leather belt with life and res, which is just as good. And if you are able to get a hunter influenced or warlord influenced belt of some sort, you are able to roll a couple of damage properties on it, which is pretty cool. And then with regard to the boots, so the boot slot I like to keep very straightforward. I personally don't like running Atziri step because it doesn't give you any res, and I feel like there are so many other bases that actually can give you damage. So I personally prefer using just a solid pair of rare boots with life res. If you can get a temple mod, you can get a little bit of dodge. If you can get a really good unveil, you can get movement speed plus another bonus as well, which is also pretty good. So yeah, I just like to keep the boot simple. And then finally, about the flasks. So this is like a flask layout that I like to use. So I think that the most important things on the flasks that you want for this build are freeze immunity, curse immunity, phasing, and onslaught. And that pretty much wraps up the gear for this build. So with regard to leveling this build, it can be a little bit challenging to level it at league start because you don't really get too much damage nodes here. And it's also tricky because Occultist doesn't naturally get TR as a gem. So if you're leveling this like mid-league, then you can just use a tabula or something, and you can just basically use the endgame skill tree for leveling. But if you're doing it at league start, you may find that using Caustic Arrow to level is really slow. So what I like to do is I like to level with Icicle Mines. So in the POB provided in the description, I have this separate leveling tree here. It's an Icicle Mine Frostbomb leveling tree. And I also have the links over here in the skill section if you want to take a look. Basically, the idea is you use Freezing Pulse until level 12, and then you switch to Icicle Mines. And you basically take spell damage nodes and cold damage, and also elemental damage on the tree. And you basically use Icicle Mines all the way until you get your 3rd lab, which is by the time you beat the campaign. And then at this point, you want to do all the side quests to get 20 refund points, and then you refund all of the cold damage and spell damage, and then you start building towards the endgame tree. I have also heard from a friend that you can level this with Chaos Spellslinger, but I have not personally tried it, so I can't say anything about that. So yeah, that's pretty much it. That's the build. Again, I would highly recommend it. I had a blast playing this build with nothing more than very budget gear, like nothing more than a 5 link plus 2 bow. You can easily get like 500 to 700k Shaper DPS. It's pretty good. And also it's a nice break from the more popular Toxic Rain Ascendancies because you get a lot of cool bonuses with Occultist, like Explode. So it's pretty cool, and yeah, thank you guys for watching. And with that, I will leave you guys with this Trial Master fight that I ran into. Not gonna spoil it, but yeah, hope you guys enjoy, and see you guys next time.